quickly about the end user monitoring and what that means to us. So I'd like to whiteboard a little bit here. When we talk about an application interface, we understand that this is where business happens, why it's imperative for you to monitor that perspective. What that means in reality, though, is a couple different things. The user is interfacing with fields and conditions on the application itself. The presentation of that information has to be monitored to know how quickly it showed, was it showing any faults, were there performance issues, and things like that. We kind of call that key to glass. As soon as they hit enter, they're looking for some kind of response. The industry kind of uses this term end-to-end monitoring, sometimes end-user monitoring in the same terms. We don't use them that way. In the back end of your application, there's an application tier that exists. There might be some business logic tier that exists. There's a database tier that exists. In each of those stacks, there's some kind of transaction that's responding back and forth. At every point of presence, there's a network condition that happens as well, too. So end-to-end, we're expecting that there's certain monitoring tools that are in place. End-to-end monitoring means we look at each one of those specific points and we use the right tool for that. Network monitoring tools for network conditions, fault, availability, capacity, performance. Application tiers, same thing. It's J2E, we'll look into the Java stack. If it's .NET, we'll look into the CLR stack. If it's the database, we're looking at queries and response time. All of those conditions ultimately affect the end user. When we talk about end user monitoring, what we're looking for specifically on the end user, was that information presented to them within a certain period of time and without faults and conditions. And we can do this in multiple ways. The industry really breaks it down into two major categories, synthetic or real user. Synthetic user means that we have some kind of fake person here, a little robot, that sits and pumps stuff into the application, filling out the form and field. You would put a robot at each of your distinct locations or maybe specific high-volume locations, and they would be running all the time. Synthetics have value in a couple different ways. From an availability perspective, it's strong. You could have a site that all of a sudden is having an availability impact. You don't have users there yet starting up at the site, but your robot's running. It's telling you, from that location, you're not having availability. You can get your team on it before the users get there. That's great. Also gives you predictability. So you can look from a performance standpoint, what are my response times from these locations from a robotic standpoint? Users are not always interacting the same way. They're not always presenting with the same information. Query times change, things like that. It's hard to know performance from that perspective. So you get consistency with synthetic. So there's two value points for synthetic, and we can go down that path and talk about that. Here's the challenge with synthetic. It's not giving you your real users. So your robot might be okay on this particular transaction, but maybe you have 20 other transactions that real users are doing, and they're experiencing problems. In the real user monitoring space, two approaches. One, you can look from a client side, which means you install some kind of agent on the client side, or you can do what's called agentless, which back in your data center, someplace as kind of a funnel point where people are coming into, maybe just behind a firewall, or just in front of some web service or application server that your application is talking to, we put a probe. And what the probe does is watching all these streams of communication coming through. A bunch of different technologies in the marketplace. Some are web only. They give you real good visibility. They can replay those transactions from an HTTP perspective. But if your application is not HTTP based, maybe it's got some other TCP/IP services, we'll need something a little more advanced here. And we can help you figure that out as well. What we can do is we can actually look at all your users coming in, where they're coming in from, and we can start to do an application decode and bundle those application requests into specific business processes. So it's watching all those business processes real time. It's looking for faults and error conditions. We can specify what those are. We are also then looking for response time to and from the destination points. So it gives us some kind of response time metrics. And we can also start to correlate some of your back-end information as well, too. A bunch of different solutions in this marketplace. The value proposition for agentless monitoring is it's agentless. You don't have interoperability issues on the client. You have usually very little impact in actually instrumenting this. You can run it off a spam port, some other kind of probe. You can pump out data to that. Challenge with it is that you usually need to be a high-end device if you've got high volumes. Some applications are very difficult to decode, and the price point on some of these tools out there in the marketplace can get pretty expensive. We use a combination of open source for some low-end solutions, and then we'll use third-party products for some In the slides I'm going to show you right now, what this slide is showing is that the value from an end user standpoint is that all your siloed approaches can be up and running, but the end user is experiencing issues. With a true end user monitoring solution, we can see when and where those end users happen. Is it time of day, day of month? Is it from certain locations? We call this fault domain isolation. And the value proposition to us is that with all of our end-to-end monitoring, all the things we're watching, CPU, memory, disk, log files, all that stuff, it's finding needles in a stack of needles. There's always infrastructure issues going on. But are they affecting end users? With the real end user monitoring going on all the time, now we have correlation time slots. We can look at those time slots and start to see what is spiking out during that time that could be affecting those end users. Those correlation points are huge for us fixing true root cause analysis issues, true problems that are not one-off, but consistently impacting your users. And it gives you that fault domain isolation to tell you, is it the application itself, or is it something within the silo? And then you can really hone your team in on those particular issues. Hope this gives you a good example of what end user monitoring means to us, sets us up for our next discussions.